Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. These are troubled times for immigrants in the United States and for the enormous numbers of students at City University who were born in foreign countries. Among the many important and often emotional issues on the table is the fate of President Obama's so-called DACA program, which stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's a program that has already brought hundreds of thousands of young immigrants out of the shadows, giving them protections against deportation and allowing them to work freely, get driver's licenses, and otherwise lead more normal lives. Donald Trump has said he will get rid of the program, and in a worst-case scenario, these young people who thought they were taking a giant step toward the American dream may have in fact put themselves in the crosshairs of the deportation authorities. We'll talk about this and other matters with my guest, Allan Wernick, a professor of law at Baruch College and director of City University's Citizenship Now project. Professor, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming in. So this program, popularly referred to as DACA, talk about that a little bit. Explain what it does, when it took effect.
Well, it was announced by President Obama on June 15, 2012, and the purpose of the program is to provide protection from deportation and employment authorization, and in certain cases, the right to travel outside of the United States to young people, individuals who came to the United States before the age of 31. They had to have been in the United States for 5 years when the program was announced on June 15, 2012. And it was an administrative action taken by the president to mandate this program with the USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. I think out of frustration that Congress had not acted as he hoped it would to provide either a general legalization program for all undocumented immigrants, or if that failed, a special program for these dreamers who came to the United States before the age of 16, and like I said, were under 31 when the program was initiated.
So it's been in effect since 2012, about 4 years.
Yes.
How well has it worked?
Well, I think it's worked pretty well. More than 740,000 individuals had applied. There were estimates of more than 1 million people that qualified, but no one's really sure whether those estimates are accurate. So I would say it's been a really good program. We have doctors and lawyers and teachers and skilled workers and college students who are all benefiting from this program. It's been quite successful. Many people have traveled abroad for study abroad through a program called Advanced Parole that the Immigration Service initiated. So I think it's been a really great program, and it would be a shame if it was discontinued.
I think Trump has said that he's going to discontinue the program, but Trump has been all over the place on so many issues that, matters tend to remain murky. Do you have a sense of what his plans are for DACA?
Well, I would agree with you that no one really knows. I have a guess, an educated guess. My guess is that what he'll do is he will let people who have DACA already stay in that status until their status expires. Each application for DACA is valid for 2 years. People have renewed, obviously people who started in August 2012 when the government started accepting applications. Some of those people have renewed. Some of those people have just a few months left. Some people have almost 2 years left because the Immigration Service is still adjudicating extensions and new applications. So my guess is he will let that program stay. He could terminate it. He has that authority. But all of these young people have employment authorization cards. They're in the workplace. It'll be quite disruptive. And in any event, it would be difficult for him to get them to send their cards back in for the government. So that's my guess. Whether he will allow the program to continue, my guess is it's unlikely, but you never know. Apparently, Senators Graham and Durbin are introducing legislation that would allow individuals who have DACA to stay in that status indefinitely, to renew it every 2 years. So we'll see, that may go somewhere. I suspect that what Trump may do in his administration use it sort of as a sort of Damocles holding over the Democrats. He's going to want some very restrictive immigration reform going forward. And by by allowing these people to stay in DACA status, with the idea that they may lose that status at any time, he may use that to try and push the Democrats to do something more of what he wants.
The worst case scenario that I mentioned is that by signing up for this program, these individuals who are undocumented provided the federal government with all of their personal information, their names, ages, where they lived, et cetera, so that if, for whatever reasons, the Department of Homeland Security or the administration decided that they wanted mass deportation or they wanted to deport these individuals for whatever reasons, the information is right there. To what extent, even if it's a small possibility, to what extent do you think that is a possibility?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. I believe it's a very small possibility, and I would like to give you the reasons.
Yes.
First of all, deporting people is a very expensive process. There's one estimate takes $10,000. They still have to find these people. Some of these people may have moved since those addresses were submitted. Once they first picked up the first couple, 3, my guess is the other 740,000 that are definitely going to move. So I don't think it's going to be so easy. The deportation process, in terms of arresting people, my guess is that what Trump will do is he will do as he promised. He will make a focus on people with criminal records. He will do everything he can to make a show of upping the deportation numbers for people who have criminal records. Now, we need to remember that President Obama has deported more people than any other president in American history.
I was going to get to that point.
Yes, well, so the current administration is already deporting people, particularly those with criminal records. I mean, in 2014, the president changed the policy somewhat to allow people who did not have criminal records to be free from deportation. They have no legal status, no right to work, but he's not been deporting those people. But people with criminal records, people who, what he calls abscondees, or what people call abscondees, people who didn't show up their deportation hearings, those people have been deported. So I don't know where, first of all, I think this 2 to 3 million he's talked about of people with criminal records, I think that number's way large, maybe a few 100,000. In any event, I don't see that as a priority. It would be very disruptive. More than 250 college presidents have written to the administration asking them to, the coming administration, to the Trump people, asking them to extend DACA. So I find it sort of hard to believe that that's what he would do, but he could do it, of course. He does have those addresses. But again, he's got the addresses of many other people as well. And he could increase the, he could see what he could do to deport those people first.
You mentioned President Obama. So the last number that I saw was that Obama had deported 2.5 million people, which is substantially more than George W. Bush had deported, for example. Why has he done that?
I can't speak for the president, but the assumption that most of us have who work in the field is that the president thought by having a restrictive immigration program, deporting a lot of people, making it harder for people to get certain kinds of benefits, that he would convince the Republicans that he was serious about stopping unlawful immigration, deporting people who are here unlawfully, and that would win them over to a generous immigration plan. Now, it is true that in 2013, the Senate, with some Republicans supporting it, did pass a major immigration reform bill that would have legalized most of the undocumented people here. It would give them benefits to the people we call the dreamers, the people now who have DACA. And the votes were there in the House, but the Speaker refused to bring it to a vote, and it just died. So if that was his plan, it didn't work out so well.
Right. So we don't know, in a broad sense, what Trump is going to do with regard to immigration, but it was such an important part of his campaign. Now, nearly half of CUNY's students are foreign-born.
That's correct.
And here in New York City, I mean, I don't know how many immigrants there are, but tons of immigrants. I mean, most New Yorkers that I'm aware of just take immigrants for granted. They're just part of the population of your city. But now, so many of those folks are fearful about what is to come. You're the director of Citizenship Now. So explain to us what that is and what and it provides services and assistance for immigrants across New York City. Explain to us what it does and what are the kind of things that you're seeing?
Well, what Citizenship Now was created 20 years ago. It was originally designed to help our students become U.S. citizens. It was developed and envisioned by Senior Vice Chancellor Jay Hershenson as a way to allow permanent residents to become citizens so they could participate in the very robust voter registration and get out the vote program that CUNY has. So it's been around for 20 years. Now it's expanded beyond just our student body. It's open to the public. It's 100% free. We provide a number of services. About 60% of the cases that we handle are people applying to become U.S. citizens. The other 40% include family-based immigration. We help people get green cards based on marriages or family relations. We help people with the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. We help people with temporary protective status and extensions of those applications. That's a program for people who the U.S. Government has deemed cannot return to their country either because of war or natural disaster. For example, after the Haitian earthquake, a number of New Yorkers from Haiti were able to get temporary protective status. We do advice on other kinds of issues. So we have a very broad program. What we're trying to do now in the face of the fear that you described is we're trying to screen as many undocumented people, starting with our student body and then expanding from there to see if they might qualify for some immigration benefit. Sometimes people really don't know. Like, for instance, if a person was a victim of a crime and they are cooperating with law enforcement, they may qualify for a visa called a U visa that will let them eventually stay in the United States permanently. If a person is under 21 and they're not living with their parents, they may qualify for a special green card for a special immigrant juvenile status. Sometimes people are married to a U.S. citizen. They came in illegally. Someone told them they can't get a green card. It's much more difficult, but it's not impossible. We're trying to help those people as well. So that's what we're doing. Going to the future, we just don't know. We're trying to advise people about what the deportation process means. But one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to create too much fear, because we think that will work against our immigrant population, because rather than trying to get benefits from the government, they will be afraid to try and get those. And the benefits do exist. The public needs to understand, particularly the immigrant public needs to understand that while a new administration could change how the law is implemented, it cannot change the law. So only Congress can do that. So Congress says who can get a green card and who cannot get a green card, who can be a citizen, who cannot be a citizen. And the Trump administration will not have the power to change that. Who can get asylum, who cannot get asylum. So we don't want people to be afraid. Secondly, we don't want to spend a lot of resources and energy that could be used now helping people get some kind of benefit, preparing for something we don't know is going to happen. Right. You know, there were millions of dollars spent all over the nation getting ready for what was called the expanded DACA program, because President Obama announced an expansion of the program. It was halted by the courts. The circuit court upheld a temporary injunction, and the Supreme Court let that stand. So nobody was able to make those applications. We thought that was a poor use of resources. We thought it was better, again, to try and move people as far along what we call the path to citizenship. So if we can make you legal, get you DACA, get you a green card, that's put you on the path to citizenship.
One final question about DACA. The last I read was that City University and also I think the University of California at Berkeley had been recommending to its students that they no longer apply for DACA. Is that still the case?
Well, it's up to each individual student to make their own decision. Our recommendation is that people not apply, primarily because we're concerned that they're going to lose the fee. I mean, they can always, if Trump allows it's already December. If Trump in January discontinues the program, the students will lose the $465. Now, some students have decided they want to go ahead and file anyways because they're not fearful of deportation, and they're concerned that they want to be able to work if Trump continues the program. So we think it's generally a bad idea, but I don't feel very strongly about it, frankly. It's not me that's going to be deported, so I have to be very careful how I give this advice. But as I mentioned before, I don't see applying for DACA as particularly endangering an individual, so it's up to the individual to decide.
This may sound like an obvious question, but I'd like you to give a sense of why these immigration issues are so important to immigrants. So if you're an undocumented immigrant in a big teeming city like New York, what's your daily life like? What does it mean to be undocumented versus having some form of documentation?
Well, for most New Yorkers, because we're such an immigrant-friendly city, the main problem is that you can't get a decent job and you can't work on the books and pay taxes. So that means that the typical immigrant who's undocumented is going to end up probably in a job where they get a wage less than they deserve under working conditions that are less favorable than if they were lawfully authorized to work. But other than that, for most people, their day-to-day life doesn't change. Now, there are some people who are particularly afraid. I remember one woman said she really loved to go to museums, and when I helped her get a green card, well, my project helped her get a green card, she said, oh, great, I'll be able to go from Brooklyn into Manhattan and go to museums, because I was afraid to go. But I think most of the people that we meet are not afraid. The students in CUNY, most of them are not as fearful, at least they weren't before all this anti-immigrant rhetoric took hold in the country. So there are more people who are afraid. There's some people that are terribly afraid. You know, we had an intern working at our project who we found crying at her desk because she was undocumented and she was afraid that now something terrible was going to happen to her. And we reassured her that, first of all, New York's a particularly safe place for immigrants. You know, if the Immigration Service wants to do big raids, which they haven't done in New York City in many, many years, they need help from the NYPD because they don't have the resource. You know, they don't have the resources to like block, let's say, to block a street where a factory is and go into that factory and try and raid it. Now they can do that in Nebraska maybe, but they're not going to be able to do that in New York City, especially with this administration. Secondly, you know, a lot of these immigration folk that are working in New York City, you know, they're from New York City. You know, some of them were foreign born themselves. You know, I was at a visit to 26 Federal Plaza, which is where the service side of immigration is. But one of the people there said, "Oh, I'm taking classes in CUNY to learn more about immigration, and I read a book that you wrote about and asked me to autograph it." You know, so we have people even volunteering with CUNY who have worked with the Immigration Service before. So. New York is different. Now, other cities, I would say maybe you have to be a little bit more cautious, especially along the border. You know, places like Texas, Arizona, where there's such a strong anti-immigrant sentiment. Again, you have many friendly people in the Immigration Service, with ICE, as they call it, Immigration Custom Enforcement. But the ICE union, you know. President-elect Trump said that ICE endorsed it, and of course that's not true because it's a federal agency. But it is true that the union that represents
didn't matter to him.
It didn't. Well, it is what it is. The union did endorse him, and they're of course expecting to have a big budget increase, and I expect that they'll get it.
Right. New York is a sanctuary city.
That's right.
Well, that's a big deal. So I'd like you to explain what a sanctuary city is and what the potential problems are now for sanctuary cities under a Trump administration.
Well, first let me say that we have the most immigrant-friendly administration, have had going back way back to Koch, through Giuliani, who was a very pro-immigrant mayor, through Mayor Bloomberg, through now to Mayor de Blasio. We have more resources that come from the city council and from the city budget that go into helping immigrants. We have the strongest Office of Immigrant Affairs under Commissioner Anisha Agarwal of any city in the country. And of course, City University has the strongest immigration law service program of any university in the country. So that's something to be said about New York City. Now, being a sanctuary city, it doesn't really have a strict definition, but I think what it means in New York City is that when a person is arrested for a crime, in New York City, that person information is not going to be provided to ICE if it comes to the attention of the local authorities that the person is undocumented.
ICE being the federal immigration authorities.
That's right, ICE being the federal immigration enforcement authorities. So, secondly, if there's what they call an administrative hold, let's say it does come to the attention of ICE that an individual is here unlawfully. The position of the New York City government is that unless the person has been convicted of a serious felony, particularly a violent felony, then the immigration service is not going to hold that person on what they call an administrative warrant. See, that the ICE has the authority administratively to tell the police, please hold this person, but that warrant does not have the authority of law. It is a pretty please, can you hold this person?
Right. It's a request.
It's a request because ICE does have the authority to detain that person, but they don't have authority to order New York NYPD or New York City authority to hold that person. So the Obama administration, the de Blasio administration said that it's going to continue with that policy. There is some concern that Trump will withhold federal funding from cities that do not cooperate now with the ICE enforcement. I'm not an authority in this area. I've been reading both sides of the argument. Some people say that the federal administration does not have that authority. Some say they do, and de Blasio said whether they do or they don't, we're not going to cooperate. And a number of other major cities, Los Angeles and other cities, have said that. So I think that's going to cause a real problem for the Trump administration. One thing about this whole deportation process, it does require popular cooperation, just like any form of law enforcement. Whether you're going after drug dealers or you're going after undocumented immigrants, if the populace is not around those people, is not cooperating, if they're putting glue in the doors when the immigration service is coming, it's going to be very difficult for them to enforce it. So that's why I believe strongly that what more likely Trump is going to try to do is, one, he's going to beef up the border. Two, he is going to try to increase the deportation of individuals with criminal convictions. And three, he's going to seek legislation which is going to try to punish people more severely who are here in the United States illegally through criminal action and through blocking their ability to get permanent residence and U.S. citizenship. So I think, to me, that is more likely and realistically the Trump plan. Now, whether he can accomplish that or not depends on how strong a stand the Democrats take in the Senate, because they still have 48 votes, and there's several Republican senators who are quite friendly to the immigration, to a pro-immigrant point of view. McCain and Jeff Flake, even Marco Rubio, certainly Phil Gramm, and like I said, even Marco Rubio, he has had a strong immigration position in the past, and there are a few others too that might be brought along. So I have to, like I said, I have to be careful. I always tell my students when they ask me what I think, the kinds of questions you're asking me, what do I think is going to happen? And what should we do about it? And I always say this: I'm not an immigrant, and I'm not going to tell the immigrants' rights movement or any particular immigrant how they should conduct themselves. That's not my job. My job is to explain the law, and when asked, as you have asked, give my opinion about what I think is going to happen. And what I think is going to happen is there's not going to be mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. That's what I think is going to happen. There will not be. The other three things, yes, the border enforcement, the deportation of criminals, and the effort to change the law to make it more difficult for people who violate the law to stay in the United States or to avoid criminal prosecution.
We're going to wrap it up right there. I wish we had more time. Professor Allan Wernick, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
We'll be back in a moment with a final word. Steve Mnuchin would seem to be the last person you would turn to for a top government position if you were concerned about working people, especially men and women still struggling in today's economy. Mr. Mnuchin, a former Goldman Sachs partner, was a big-time predatory banker who thrived by snatching the homes of working people rocked by the housing crisis that accompanied the Great Recession. A populist, he ain't. If you were a family in trouble during the worst days of the financial crisis, encountering Steve Mnuchin would be your worst nightmare. Mnuchin and his partners bought IndyMac, one of America's largest mortgage lenders, after it collapsed in the subprime mortgage debacle. The bank's name was changed to One West, and Mnuchin and his associates went on a foreclosure rampage. According to the California Reinvestment Coalition, One West foreclosed on over 36,000 homes in California alone. Simon Malloy, writing in Salon, said, all of these foreclosures gave rise to a series of media reports about homeowners who were badly mistreated by One West. An elderly California couple tried desperately to work with the bank to modify the terms of their loan and were told by a One West vice president that they'd get a 60-day extension to work things out. Their home was sold the following day without their knowledge. A Minnesota woman who was in the process of renegotiating her One West loan came home from work one day to find the locks on her doors had been changed. A subsidiary of One West moved to foreclose on an elderly Florida woman's home after a payment error of 27 cents. This is the man, Steve Mnuchin, who's been selected by Donald Trump to be America's next Treasury Secretary. You can dream about populism all you want. You can delude yourself into thinking the Trump administration will be the champion of working people. You have that right. But the reality is that we are about to embark on a campaign of predatory capitalism that will make the excesses of the Reagan and George W. Bush administrations seem like the work of amateurs. That's all for now. See you next time.